Look, I'm very sympathetic to the people whose lives were impacted by the lawfare of the Biden administration. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of people whose lives were essentially ruined. They were dealing with years of litigation. I mean, went into massive $100,000 debt.
You're talking about the people who
were associated
broke
with
into
him.
the Capitol,
I'm talking about people who worked with him in the administration who couldn't get jobs, were blacklisted after. So I'm very sympathetic. Like Hope Hicks, people who couldn't get jobs.
Hope Hicks was never charged with anything.
A fiery debate exploded on CNN as Abby Phillip challenged the idea of using taxpayer money to compensate Trump allies and pardoned individuals who claimed they were politically targeted. What started as a discussion about justice and accountability quickly turned into a heated clash over ethics, government spending, and whether the proposal could create a dangerous political precedent. Lydia Moynihan defended the proposal, arguing that supporters of Trump who faced investigations deserve a path for compensation, while Abby Phillip repeatedly pressed the panel on transparency, fairness, and the risks of political favoritism. The exchange became even more intense as questions were raised about January 6 defendants, pardons, and whether public funds should ever be used in this way. The debate also touched on broader concerns surrounding government power, legal accountability, and how these decisions could impact future elections. As the conversation escalated, Abby Phillip took firm control of the panel, forcing direct answers while the arguments grew sharper on both sides. So let's dive in and watch how Abby Phillip takes control of the debate on Newsnight. With Abby Phillip, the discussion was sparked by reports about a proposed anti-what fund, which critics say could become a taxpayer-funded payout system for Trump allies and supporters. Supporters of the proposal argue it would compensate people they believe were unfairly targeted during previous investigations, while opponents say it dangerously blurs the line between justice and political law.
Tonight, an unusual proposal from the Trump administration that critics are calling absurd, extraordinary, and outright corrupt. According to ABC, Donald Trump is expected to drop his $10 billion lawsuit against the IRS in exchange for the creation of a political slush fund for MAGA allies who were investigated by President Biden. Now, the $1.7 billion weaponization fund for MAGA allies would get out ahead of a judge potentially just dismissing Trump's IRS case, and it would be paid for by taxpayers, according to the New York Times. For months, Trump World has explored the concept of a compensation fund for allies who incurred legal fees during those Biden-era investigations of Trump, and the money would be made available to the nearly 1,600 people with charges related to the Capitol riot. According to ABC, final terms of the settlement will not be set until they are officially announced. This is on several levels a pretty extraordinary thing. And I think just to understand why we're even talking about this, one thing you've got to know is that the case that Trump has against the government for the IRS might be thrown out simply because he runs the government. And for obvious reasons, it doesn't really make a lot of sense for his own Justice Department to decide whether or not he gets a massive multi-billion-dollar payout. So instead, they're going to create a $1.7 billion fund to potentially compensate pardoned January 6th rioters. How does that work?
Look, I'm very sympathetic to the people whose lives were impacted by the lawfare of the Biden administration. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of people whose lives were essentially ruined. They were dealing with years of litigation. I mean, went into massive $100,000 debt.
You're talking about the people who
were associated with him.
I'm
talking about people who worked with him in the administration who couldn't get jobs, were blacklisted after. So I'm very sympathetic. Like Hope Hicks, people who couldn't get jobs.
Hope Hicks was never charged with anything.
No, but I'm saying the lawfare, the people who had to spend years of their lives in response. I'm very sympathetic to that.
She was held accountable for upholding an insurrection, so people wouldn't hire her?
People who happened to be working in the administration to defend America and do what they thought was best.
Private employers decided
their lives
to hold
were upended.
But
also, I'm very sympathetic to that.
I don't think she's a great example because Hope Hicks was hired, okay? She was hired in private sector jobs after leaving the administration. She's fine.
My point is I'm very sympathetic to those people. I don't know that this is the mechanism to right that wrong. I think there's a lot of questions about how the funds will be allocated and how it's actually going to be.
I think this puts Todd Blanche in a tricky position as well because Tom Tillis, senator from North Carolina, has said that he is iffy on pushing forth his nomination if Todd Blanche doesn't admit that the people at January 6th committed a crime. So I think being a part of this fund, it'll be interesting to see how the Justice Department is able to get Todd Blanche forward if this moves forward with the January 6th.
Yeah, I'll say on the surface, I mean, it smells bad when you hear this and you read the stories. But I would make 2 points. First, in the New York Times version of this story, they claim that this fund is being fast-tracked. But then at the same time, twice they say that nothing has been improved, nothing has been finalized. This wouldn't be the first time that stories like this pop up about the administration, something leaks out, it's kind of trial ballooned, and then nothing ever comes of it. The second point is, I do believe that people in this country who are wrongfully accused, wrongfully prosecuted, are eligible for restitution. I'm not saying every single person that we're talking about here should get it. I don't think all 1,600 rioters on January 6th should get a single dime or cent out of this. But if there are people who can make a case that they were wrongfully prosecuted, wrongfully targeted by the Biden administration, then they should have some restitution, just like any other American.
That's a generic statement that I think sounds good if you don't pay attention to the details of what we're actually talking about here, which is that these are all people that Trump has already, through an official act, suggested were wrongfully prosecuted. The president is then now saying, potentially, that they're going to create a fund that would allow those very people. There's no mechanism for distinguishing the pardons of cop beaters from anybody else, right? They're all pardoned. They could all be, why would they not all be eligible for this fund?
Can I just say, I want to say very genuinely, I appreciate Lydia and Pete, you all acknowledging how bad this looks. I think it's important that Republicans, that conservatives call this out. My second challenge to you will be, what are you going to do about it? Because I can just tell you, Donald Trump does things like this all the time. He creates these tests for folks like you.
Again, this is still a hypothetical.
Okay,
it hasn't happened.
Let's say hypothetically $1 billion slush fund paid by taxpayers is created. I hope that you continue to use your voice the way you do, and I hope that Republicans in elected office take a cue from you and actually do their job, hold them accountable, do the oversight, and if they don't do the oversight, it's going to be part of the reason why they are not in office come this November.
Is that a challenge to Todd Blanche?
I think so.
See what he does. I mean, this is uncapped money. It doesn't need congressional approval. I think that's a little tricky.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point, we don't know all the details, right? We don't know the details. We don't know what conditions will be placed. We don't know if you have to apply. We don't know any of that. So it's all literally hypothetical.
Taxpayers would pay for it.
I guess my point is, really, does it matter? If we're talking about
details always matter.
No, if we're talking about a specially created fund for people that the president has determined for whatever reason were wrongfully prosecuted, and honestly, mainly because he thinks that everything that was done by Biden was wrong, does it really matter whether you have to fill out an application or not? I mean, isn't the principle this should or should not be happening? I mean, do you think there's any world in which
it's probably going to be
happening?
litigated, just like everything this administration does.
But do you think that in any world this should be happening, period? Because there are mechanisms. If you have a grievance against the government and you're just a regular citizen, you can file your own lawsuit. Why is Trump creating a special pathway for his allies?
Well, they've done their homework, and I'm not saying it is right. I'm not saying it's correct. I don't know all the legalities behind it, but their argument is that this is very similar to an Obama-era fund that was created for Native American farmers.
How is it very similar to that?
I said their argument. I didn't say I agree. I said their argument.
The structure
I'm telling
of the
you
fund
what's in the reporting.
Right.
But they've clearly they've done enough homework to say, hey, this will be our case if it ends up going to court. Then courts will decide whether it's right or wrong.
I think every Republican in America needs to be asked, do you think that our tax dollars should go to pay off Donald Trump's political grievances? They shouldn't, period.
At the end of the day, this debate highlighted just how divided America remains over Donald Trump, government accountability, and the role of taxpayer money in politics. Abby Phillip focused heavily on the ethical concerns and repeatedly questioned whether compensating political allies could undermine public trust in the justice system. Meanwhile, Lydia Moynihan and Trump supporters argued that people who were unfairly investigated deserve some form of redress and transparency. What made the exchange so intense was that both sides were debating far more than just money. They were debating power, precedent, and whether politics is now influencing every part of the legal system. And with the 2026 political season heating up, discussions like this are only becoming